Ebusiafo enche bia no e beto dwa say President Donald Trump US for president was slapping some tariffs okay on some countries. Now Ghana yenya fair share of it, which is 10%. Na in komo bebre aba because ebanisa na it affects businessmen and women ewo krodwe mu hanum say on that issue no na Samuel Okujeto Ablakwa, who happens to be the foreign minister wode beto dwa say omo ene US ambassador is it Virginia Palmer. Yes, omone no akasa efa sa tariff ni ho ama omuchemu say it doesn't affect all goods. Omuchemu say to say oil say no it doesn't affect it any other things womo kan wasem name Virginia Palmer ashe foreign minister boss on President Donald Trump ebe kasa dia fa no ma hwede ometimi aden ayafa this whole issue enho eno na MP for Ofuase Ayirebi miankasa Mr. Crash ane Oppong Nkrumah honorable former works and housing minister we dia betu dwa say sa tariffs we ka ho asemi sebe there is more to it. Yemu bebre no as and he has explained into further details about this whole 10% tariff. US president Ediato Ghana for us. Yonko tiensema ode etuja.
Kojo Oppong, member of parliament for Ofuase. Yesterday, a number of Ghanaian ministers met with the US ambassador to try and understand the reasons behind the 10% tariff on exports from Ghana to America as imposed by the US President Trump. My journal online has a report that I find very interesting. It says that at the end of the meeting, read this, according to Samson Ahin, who is Deputy Minister for Trade and Industry, Ambassador Palmer herself appeared taken aback by the inclusion of cocoa in the tariff scheme and suggested that Ghana pursue resolution at a higher diplomatic level. That's code language for tell President Mahama to talk to President Trump. And remember, we'll be making the point that the President of Ghana needs to get involved to speak to the US President to ensure that the potential negative impact of this thing doesn't affect us. But there's another part of this report I find very interesting. Come again. Samson Ahin says that President Mahama has tasked us, that is his ministers, to ensure that efforts have been made to ensure that this problem of the Trump tariffs slapped on the country is addressed. Mr. Ahin revealed in an interview. In other words, while the US ambassador is telling the Ghanaian ministers that tell the Ghanaian president to talk to President Trump, the president of Ghana is telling his ministers, deal with it. Folks, this is a matter that needs to be taken more seriously than it's being taken now. The reason is that if these 10% tariffs stand, what will first of all happen is that Ghanaian products on American markets that are affected by these tariffs will be more expensive than competitor products from other countries that are not similarly affected. If that happens, the demand for the Ghanaian products will drop. If that demand drops, the foreign exchange earnings that we make from exports of these products to America, over $1 billion a year, will drop. And that means that our earnings from that trade will drop. Apart from the earnings of that trade dropping, the jobs that depend on exports to America, like those in garments, in cocoa, and in other areas, will also be at risk. All of this is even apart from the potential higher global inflation that may come as other countries respond with their own tariffs. So this is a matter that needs to be taken seriously, rather than passing the buck between ministers and the president. The government of Ghana needs to take this matter seriously and act now.
So that is what Honorable Kojo Oppong can say. How serious is the President John Dramani Mahama taking this whole tariff thing? Because it has a great impact on a business koso Ghana hanum saints and the businessmen and women they will feel more. Me me camera chi na microphone si me. One way or the other, it be affecting me indirectly. But those that have the direct impact because of this 10% US tariff, no, the businessmen more crane more imports man what I say, omono enebe affect omo. And Kojo Oppong is saying, looking at Nsema the foreign minister yera Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa where they betu mountain. So no, it boils down to the fact say we have to put in so much efforts as government so the beya able to me handle this issue, because anyasa be hard to think say bia say yes, so you increase here there because you won't say other countries are trying to do the same thing now and share net or however, but at the end of the day ni nyina ni ye die mu na ye peno. So nana, this is what Kojo Oppong Nkrumah is saying. Utie nsema or Canada, is he trying to say Ghana so ye increase here there against US?
No, what he's basically trying to say is that we need to seek mediation. And just earlier today, before this particular story, we were discussing about the current trade war between China and the US, and we're all skeptical. So how is this going to play out? Because of this trade war, no, the current ban of TikTok, no, it's in limbo. We all think a company will have purchased it now, and someone banning the but China is saying so they own it, and because of Trump's tariffs, they are not going to use it. They are not going to allow the sale of it. So basically, they are using it as a weapon, as a tool for negotiation. But far from that, no, as the last time we spoke, no, the US under the leadership of Donald Trump, no, he's doing this because he believes, and yes, he believes a common known fact, the US is in trade deficit with almost all other countries on earth, which means that more countries are exporting to the United States of America than importing. And when that thing happens, what it really does is, at the end of the day, my country, where economic proudness, insipid, which means as every time piano exporting to other countries, basically people throwing money to you, because anytime their money doesn't really stay in the country. Into US is really in debt over $3 trillion or so. So what Trump is trying to do is says okay, the US is hugely in debt. We want to also be able to sell to other countries, and because of that, what we are going to do is that we are going to try to balance the trade imbalances. So if Ghana for the IDF US Ghana tax 17%, why is it that when they are bringing something to the country, we charge them less or we charge them no taxes? So the USA is actually saying, okay, we will either seek for a fair trade deal or a fair deficit deal in terms of taxes near the idea with you, or perhaps we will just give more percentage or slap you with more tariffs. So that's the whole idea of tariffs. But then we realized that Trump tariffs not the buy, at the end of the day, it went into effect. And then the good news yesterday was Trump actually paused it and gave a 90-day pause. That gave a breathing space to the market. Many markets were down. The S&P 500 together with the New York Stock Exchange, the NYSE, many markets, all of them were down. Tesla stock were down. Apple stock were down. Globally, even Hong Kong, China, and most of their stock were down. So Trump paused it, and we saw the S&P 500 together with other stocks rose significantly. So this is the main reason why Trump is doing this, not because to manipulate the market up and down curves, but then he's trying to seek a fair deal. So Ghana, he slapped us with a 10% tariff, and then what we can do as a nation is simple. And this is where Kojo Oppong Nkrumah is coming in. He said, we can't sit down aloof and just keep quiet. We can seek mediation. If the US is complaining, say the idea back room, the idea back room, they charges 17%. What can we do to have a balance or a fair trade with them? It's just simple. To me, take off your 17% or take off 10% from your 17%. At least they take 12 and then 5%. 5% is good because you want to protect the industries in your country. So we don't have almost all US goods flooding into the country. The local industries in our country, they can't compete. But in a country where we import almost everything, it makes sense. What you say, and most of the things where we export to the cocoa, the timber and stuff, it goes to the foreign country. So this is exactly what Kojo Oppong Nkrumah is saying. So let's seek mediation. Let's seek talks, bilateral talks. Let's seek diplomatic talks. And we saw the ambassador of the United States, the Ghana ambassador to US or US ambassador to Ghana, Vicky Palmer or whatever it is. We realized that the foreign minister Kojo Oppong, he said that idea we never hear talks on the higher level, as Kojo Oppong Nkrumah indicated, which means enya idea ambassador bit matna siaka. Enya idea your friend is saying ministers. Exactly. We need a special delegation to talk to Trump to say, hey, Ghana is willing to aid. That's why yesterday you realize, Trump said out of the 75 countries or slap a tariffs on policy, because almost all of them, even including China, they reached out to want a negotiation. They want to negotiate, cut off their deal. In fact, if you're following the stock market and all of these political news, you realize that EU, the European Union, they promised to take off all their taxes and have a free trade deal with the United States of America. And that doesn't mean the US can really cut off their trade deficit. If you basically cut off zero taxes and still, Europeans are still sending goods into your country to sell. But America for the Nyama buy entire the demand is low, so they will not even send it, and that is even going to increase the trade deficit, because what it means is that there's no trade barrier to curb certain things. So the only issue with EU and Trump was that Trump was saying, EU should start buying US for energy. What he said, that's US for gas, instead of buying Saudi Arabia and Russia gas. But the thing with US or more gas is that really. It won't piece and you really refined, but you're strong, and that's the same vibe you are getting here in Ghana. So Nkrumah, especially in Ghana, you see Honda, you see Toyota, you see Benz. These are more of European and also Japan made cars, and they are very durable, they last. But then use Ford. I've used Ford before, me know me home. What I say, a good car, if and only if you understand. I've also used American car, Jeep, and other stuff before, and you see it good. But then, if you speak to many people, they don't like American cars because they tell you, number one, the fuel consumption is too high, and number two, the parts are very hard to find and expensive. So people prefer the Japanese cars, the Toyota Vate, the Mazda, the Honda Civic, and Trump is saying, I want the world to, there was a curve, and I may try to say way back in 1990. The country are now they export things all over the globe. Number one Japan. Was US. The US was was the highest exporter to 175 countries. Wow. 2025. You know that the country number one, China. China is exporting to 125. The US is now the top exporter to only 30 countries. So it's a paradigm shift, and the US is sensing this as a national security risk, because if you are losing everything to China, then we are losing the number one spot. And the number one spot to China, people fear, because China is a communist country. They don't have elections like we do. So the thing is, if Nipa na or the world superpower, the ideals need to follow, or a communist, or banning Muslims, or banning religion, mamunsum nyame, or banning gayism, or banning Christianity, or be a world superpower, he's going to confer the same beliefs on you. So that is what we are seeing, and that is the pushback among your friends. But if China was able to open up and be like America in terms of diplomacy, in terms of democracy, the laws, they could easily wipe out the United States as the world superpower. Because currently, ChatGPT, they have a rival, DeepSeek, which is also doing so good. And now Chinese cars, Tesla is now number 2. BYD, Chinese electric cars, are number 1 in the whole world. So, TikTok. So that is the issue.
Well, so that is what Honorable Kojo Oppong Nkrumah is saying about this whole 10% tariff thing. More updates on this issue and more.